moment to shine on Happy Camper Life. We're loving, living, and learning online on Happy Camper Life.
Hey everybody, welcome to the My Camp podcast. I am Courtney Ortiz. You're joining me live today here in the HC where we're going to talk about camp. So I'm really excited to welcome my new camp friend, Curtis McFall. He is the owner and team leader of Camp Lookout, which is located in Frankfort, Michigan, right? That's the MI, Michigan. All right, wonderful. Welcome, Curtis. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome to my camp. So let's just start with the basics. Like, what's your camp story, man? We all have one. What is it?
Cool. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I went to a lot of camps as a kid. I never found sort of my camp. I did everything from, traditional camp to sports camps. But I always knew that camping was a part of me. And in college, I went to school to be an engineer. And I did that for a while, in school, and realized when I was in school, I need to work with kids. So I taught some sailing and did some things while in school. I was a big brother and Big Brothers Big Sisters, and that was a great program. But then I graduated as an engineer and thought to myself, well, I'm not ready to do that yet. So I went and worked at a couple of camps, mainly focused around sailing in the Chesapeake and in Florida. And then I taught sailing and things like that. After about 2 years, I went back and became an engineer and did that for 8 years. And it was a safety engineer in sort of the structural world. And 8 years was enough of that. And although I worked with some great people, I needed to be around more people. So the really sort of serendipitous. I was planning, my wife was finishing her PhD and just had to write her dissertation. And we were planning on sort of selling everything and sailing off into the sunset while she finished her dissertation. And, she was very, thinking ahead and thinking, okay, this is great, but what are you going to do when we came back? And a light bulb went off. And I said, well, I'm really just trying to figure out how not to be an engineer and go sailing. And I always knew I wanted to be in camping. And it was actually that night I was scrolling through an old website. I'm not even sure if it's there. It was basically like campsforsale.com. And on like the 15th page, I saw this little post and it was Northern Michigan Camp for Sale. Owners looking to retire, reach out. And that really sort of started it. From that moment forward, I sent an email that night, and I think it was either the next day or a day or two later, got an email back from Dave Reed, who had been running the camp for 40 years with his wife, Kathy. And from that moment, we sort of started a relationship, and it was a 5-year kind of vetting process for us, and then took over camp, basically. They're still involved, they're still around, not day to day so much, but they're there as a mentor program and things, and we do see each other quite often. But yeah, that was, so we kind of look at it as me and the team that I've been building. I have 3 directors that are very close and work very close with us. And it's sort of been us over the last 5 or 6 years, running and steering camp kind of in the direction that we've gone. And a lot has changed since then, just it's had to, growth, etc. We've started a new camp. Our trips program has grown. Then obviously COVID hit and managing that and how we were going to do it. We are a for-profit, non-organizational camp. So it's really just us and our team making this work. So yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell.
Wow. It's like I had a question before, like, where do you go to look for a camp? And it was like Camps for Sale. So there are legit websites that, do you find a camp broker to buy a camp? It just doesn't seem like something that happens. And it's so funny too, very similar to my own camp story, is like, once you put something out into the universe, like you were like, hey, I want to, maybe I'd like to go to camp or own a camp. And then you search it and it's like right there. Stars are shining from that word on the website. So you've owned camp for 5 to 6 years, and you don't just own one camp. There are like 3. You own like 3 specific like brands or camps under the Camp Lookout. Can you tell me more about that?
So there's 3 programs underneath what is now called, and we started this last year, it's now called the Project Foxwood umbrella. So Project Foxwood is the sort of overarching entity that we use that houses Camp Lookout, residential camp, Camp Carvella, residential camp, and Crystal Air Adventures, which is our wilderness trips program. And so all three of those programs are run by the same leadership team under the same philosophy umbrella, and really just kind of do things a little bit differently. Now, the two residential camps really do very much the same thing. We started Camp Carvella about 5 years ago. We were lucky enough to take over a Girl Scout camp in Northern Michigan that was owned by the Rotary of Traverse City. And they were looking for somebody to come in, and it was amazing. It's 40 minutes up the road. It's very rustic, like Camp Lookout. The stars all aligned there. And yeah, we started the camp 5 years ago, and starting a camp from scratch, we learned a ton. We thought it was going to be a little bit easier than it was, but I would never, go back and not do it. It's been an amazing experience to start a camp. And what's neat is, although it is under the same philosophy, same approach, same staff, same everything, it is starting to develop kind of its own little culture. And, I wouldn't say it's better or worse than the culture that we have had at Camp Lookout for a long, long time. It's just different, right? Inherently. And so that's really neat. And then Crystal Air Adventures is the trips program that started back in the early 2000s as the tripping program. And although we've been running trips really since the 20s, Crystal Air Adventures specifically as a trip program started then. And so it's backpacking, canoeing, sailing, all the outdoor type things. And we're starting to broaden our horizons a little bit there. We had made the decision to keep Crystal Air Adventures as a Midwest tripping program. But we're realizing that there's a lot of kids out there that, they maybe are in the Midwest and want to experience other parts of the country under our sort of philosophy or within our philosophy. So we're starting to do some bigger, we have a Joshua Tree spring break trip. We have a British Columbia backpacking trip. We always do Isle Royale, which is a super cool trip up in Lake Superior. So yeah, all three programs run kind of together, but also independently. And another reason for us to want to find another camp to run is Camp Lookout is only accessible by boat. It's not an island, but it might as well be, which means that the buildings are not winterized, and it's very hard for us to do anything in the off season. And so we wanted a space where we could run off-season programming, school groups, outdoor education, that kind of thing. And the Camp Carvella has heated facilities and all that.
So if I was a parent looking to choose one of your programs at Camp Carvella versus Camp Lookout,
Yeah.
what would be, tell me, what's the difference between?
It's very hard because we want the culture to develop in itself. So we didn't want to define the two camps differently off the bat. So I have that conversation all the time. First off, I say, well, which dates work? Because some of the camps will be filled. And so it's, you got to look at dates. But other than that, it's hard because I can't say, oh, your kid's into this, go here, or your kid's into that, go there. They're very, very similar. The staff go back and forth. It's that fluid. The culture, the expectations, and the camp itself is very similar. Now, one maybe has more water and one has more woods. And that's really the two defining characteristics of the two programs. But who doesn't like water and who doesn't like woods? So it's really dates and where are your friends going and, that kind of thing.
And it gives you an opportunity really to be able to serve more children, right? Like you have these
Exactly.
facilities, which dates, you can really serve and provide, the service to more families. So I want to go back. You had mentioned your philosophy umbrella. And on your website, because I like to do my homework, you use the terminology, and I have my degree in education. I'm a teacher in my past life.
Nice.
You use this experiential learning space. So tell me, what is an experiential learning space?
So we look at our camp is that our camp and our trips, they're not our program that kids are plugging into. We work on a collaborative programming model where the kids have a ton of power and agency over their experience. So much so that in staff training, and it takes a lot for new incoming staff to understand this, that we like to focus and look at camp as though it's the kids' camp that we're trying to facilitate for them. or with them. So they come up with most of the programming. They not only come up with the ideas, they run most of the programming. We have 6 hours throughout the day. Now, this is at the residential camp, and it works a little bit different in the TRIPS program, but on the residential camp, 6 hours of unstructured free time a day. And that's all by design, and that is super important and something that we feel is a great asset, because that allows kids the freedom to have camp, be at camp with all of camp, and sort of just be kids. We like the most successful programming we find, the way we determine successful programming is, remember when you were a kid and you had a bunch of kids over on a play date, and throughout that play date or throughout that period of time, some game develops or something developed. It was somebody and you just take it. And the next thing you know, you're running with that idea for 3 or 4 days, like in the summer. I always remember it as like, you know, you're rollerblading and you're making obstacle courses, and you get into that. And that's what you want to do all day. Like dinner comes, but you're not hungry anymore because you want to keep playing this game that you invented, and it's your game, your creation. That's really what we would say is sort of a successful experience at camp is. Go ahead.
So talk me through that. So what does that look like? Like you are camper Curtis, and
Yep.
tell me, what is your day? What's your day, your perfect camper day for you as a 10-year-old? What does that look like?
So
Hours
the
of-
day is structured, right? We do have structure because we structure around meals and around programming. But there's a lot of fluidity that happens within that. So, you know, you wake up, you've got a few things that you can choose to do in the morning. Our breakfast is a sort of slow roll breakfast. It starts at 9, but it goes basically, it starts at 8:30, but it goes from 8:30 till 9:30. So you have some kids that were up at 8 out doing yoga on the dock. You know, their teeth are brushed and they're at breakfast at 8:30, and you have others that come in and you know, at 9:30, right at the end, they're still totally asleep in their PJs and they're eating. So yeah, I guess for me, if I were a camper, I'd want to probably be, you know, jumping in the big lake and doing a polar bearing thing and then getting ready for the day. But then it's breakfast. Now what's neat at breakfast and at all meals is you sit with who you want to sit with. It's not a structured kind of dining hall. So you sit with who you want to sit with, you eat with who you want to eat with. And then we've got some free time where the kids get the opportunity to kind of present their ideas to staff and the program director of what they want to do for the day. Now, usually what happens is, rewind a little bit. Maybe I had a conversation at dinner with a counselor. Now I don't sit with my counselor. Maybe I'm sitting with, you know, a different counselor, and we're talking. What'd you do today? What are you into at home? And maybe I would have said something like, oh, I'd really love to, you know, do a scavenger type hike or a nature hike or something like that. And the counselor says, well, cool. Well, what do you mean? And through that conversation at dinner, that counselor is pulling ideas from me that we're then working together. And hopefully at the end of that conversation, the counselor is like, well, let's do that as an activity tomorrow morning. I'm like, yeah, that's great. And from that conversation, though, maybe it turned into, it's going to be a canoeing trip incorporated with a game on the lake. And then we're going to do, you know, go up and check the sand dunes and play a capture the flag type game, right? And so then the next morning, maybe I'm sitting there at breakfast looking for that counselor that I talked to at dinner, and he or she comes in and we kind of make eye contact, and then it's like, boom, let's go plan this activity while we're eating breakfast. And then we go present that to the program director, and then that activity is something that we're going to offer to the camp that morning. Yeah, so it's kind of, and then, you know, that happens again in the afternoon and it happens again at dinner. Usually our evening programs are full camp-wide activities. And those are, again, it's really cool. The culture is sort of developed now where kids will come to camp, 10-year-old kids will come to camp with a game that they've spent all year designing. And to see a kid running a game that they spent all school year designing and thinking through, and they're playing this game with 100 people is amazing.
You're absolutely right. Like, because those returning campers are going home thinking from the moment they get home, what do I want to do? And planning these games and these activities, and we're going to build forts and we're going to do this. And they're already so excited, and they're, you know, manifesting their dream camp day. That is such an interesting philosophy. So how many kids then are you serving that at a time, like during one session? How many kids?
So a full session, relatively small, 65.
Okay.
Yeah, our camp is the size of it, we can't really expand more. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to look for another site. We would have wait lists of 40 and 50 kids per session. And we thought we need to allow these kids to experience camp. So that was why we started the other camp. But we thought, and that camp is bigger, but we think 65 is a great number. Everybody within a few days has probably done an activity or sat with almost everybody at camp. And within a couple of days, almost everybody knows everybody's name. And that's really huge because there's other sort of pillars of our philosophy, but if you boil everything down, no matter what, it's about creating connections, positive connections within the community. And that's done through our philosophy. So non-competitive is a big part of what we do. We don't do, color wars and cabin wars. Not that they're bad, they're just not for our philosophy and what we're about. And so it's all about that connection. And so that's one of the reasons we're also not skills-based programming. So we don't do archery and rock climbing and things like that, because those are and they're great. Yeah, archery is a big, I've done archery, my whole life and things like that. But for our camp, it doesn't fit well because it's not about creating those connections and being creative in that programming sort of building process.
What are some of the favorite activities at camp that you offer?
Well, see, the interesting thing is because the kids are the ones determining and coming up with the programming, every single day is different. We've never had a day the same at camp, and we never will because of the way that it works. I mean, you have themes and categories that are very popular. Okay, so swimming, big games, art shed, all of that. But what they're actually doing in those can be totally different because honestly, I'd rather rely on the 65 creative little minds as opposed to relying on me to come up with ideas of what we're doing.
That's a lot of pressure. It's a
lot of pressure. It's a lot of organization. Yeah, let them determine it within a structure that feeds creativity. And it's kind of amazing what you can come up with.
One of the things too that I think really sets Camp Lookout apart is your philosophy and your beliefs on inclusion. And you have that right in the forefront of your website. And so tell me a little bit about your inclusion policy, because I know it's something you're so passionate about.
Yeah, and it was, for us, it was a no-brainer. And we've always had a very strong inclusion policy. And we just felt like the culture had sort of evolved enough where we could really put it out there and be black and white about it. And just so basically anybody's welcome at camp. I mean, we have we have campers who have been out for years. We have campers who identify as different genders. We have campers. Virtually all of our cabins are ally cabins. And so what that means is if a camper identifies as a different gender from what they were born in, they can be in that cabin and they're supported. And it's just a very freeing environment. And we'll have, one of the things we do, and it kind of drives parents a little bit crazy, is we don't do photos during our camp sessions. And that is and it's something that's for us, it's very important, and it's by design, right? A lot of parents will say, oh, well, are you just cheap, or do you not want to? No, we'll have a lot of campers who will come, and I know some of the environments that they come from might not be as forgiving as our environment. And we may have somebody who wants to wear a dress and maybe identifies as male at home, but maybe still identifies as male, but wants to wear a dress. If they are being filmed, they may not feel okay with that because they don't know, they don't want to go home and have to deal with that. So we feel like the idea of photos during the session really it doesn't allow the camper to be who they are.
Right. I make that kind of like shock face in jest because I started at my camp as the camp photographer. I'm a photographer. Yeah. And so photography at our camp is a big part of the culture, but it also depends on those campers. Some campers love to be photographed and you'll have a million photos of them. And then others, it's just not in their comfort zone for whatever reason. And then, these parents go home and see these photos and they are analyzing them to the absolute, and it takes the fun out of it, and it can be so that, and I mean, and your inclusion statement, when I say inclusion, I mean you are so specific in like your non-conforming gender inclusion. And it's like, when I read through your statement, I cried. And it was I want to say like, a mic drop moment. Like you said your statement and you drop the mic and you walk away. Like there was no question. And, any parent who, sends their child to Camp Lookout will know, this is that could be kids with who are non-conforming, and this is what it is. So I like that you put that out there and make it a safe space. So
yeah, and I don't want to take credit for it, because it really was it was from our staff, really. And they were the ones that really were pushing it, and I was happy to do that. And I mean, I hope that we're creating a staff culture where, just like with the campers, they have a bunch of power and agency. I hope that we can do that with our staff too, is that they have a lot of power and agency to steer camp in the direction that it should be going. I mean, the hard part is, I know staff sometimes want it to happen quicker. We're in the middle of a summer. It's very hard to make big structural changes, but hopefully, we can get back, we can process it in the off season and come back, stronger the next year and more evolved the next year.
What percentage of your campers do you think come in are non-conforming or non-binary?
Every year it's bigger. When this started, there was probably 3 or so. And, I don't know yet, because we actually just opened registration yesterday. So we the dust hasn't totally settled. So to run those numbers, but I would say it's 5% or so. And what's really interesting and encouraging, I think, it is a non-issue with campers.
Right. It is.
They don't care at all. Yeah,
100%.
it's a non-issue.
Even with my own children, and you're always like, oh, how are they going to react? And they just don't care. And how grateful are we to, it's still a work in progress, as we know, as we look at society around us, but where it's just not a thing anymore, which is it's so amazing. But I love that you really talk about staff, because I know, in conversations about camps, we really focus on the camper and the camp experience, but the experience for the staff can just be as transformative to them. So tell me a little bit about like your staff. Do they come year after year? What's your staff culture like?
Yeah, well, I would say I'd like to define the culture, sort of what it was pre-COVID. COVID has been, I think, for all of us, very, very hard in terms of staffing. But one of the interesting policies that we put in place is we only will have a 50% return rate on staff. So we have to have 50% new staff every year.
You have that's something you want.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, absolutely. New energy, new ideas. And one of the things I know a lot of people in the podcast do talk about camp traditions, and I'll kind of talk through one of the things that we look at in terms of traditions, and it has a lot to do with staff, right? So 50% new staff. We love having internationals. So pre-COVID, it was, we would have 30 to 40% internationals, 30 to 40% returning campers, who have been staff members, and then hopefully some new staff as well. Like I said, hopefully we create the culture where they have a lot of power and agency while they're there. And it's just a great place. I mean, right, camp, I worked at a camp in my 20s, and how much fun that was. And I mean, we've seen some cultural shifts, I think. I think I've talked to other camps who have noticed some shifting kind of happen just in terms of staff. I don't know, there seems to be a lot of weight on staff right now, independent of camp, right? They come in, and I think one of the things we're really going to try this year is to try and take some of that weight away, so that they can really be there to be free and be creative and have that space. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, what other questions about staffing?
Well, how long is your season?
So we're 11 weeks with staff week. With staff training, it's 2 weeks.
11 weeks. I mean, you talk about that's a long time.
It is.
I mean, our season is, we have one session, it's 7 weeks, and then with the training, it's another like week and a half, so 8-ish weeks. And that seems, by the end of 8 weeks, you're like, oh, it's you're grateful for the season, but 11 is really long. So it's important, so important to keep the morale up of your staff, because they are the backbones. You get to go to your, you at night, you get to go to your room. I go to my room, we can take those breaks, but for those staff, that are there 24/7 with those kids, it's a lot for them. So
Absolutely.
have you already started hiring for
Yep.
this summer? Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yep. Yep. And we're, one of the neat things we're doing this year is we're offering an internship program for educators.
Okay.
So this is for staff who are in education departments or looking to be teachers. And it's an internship program to really get them in front of kids. We have a woman that has been a part of camp. She was actually a camper way long time ago. And she was a teacher. She just retired and she's great. And she's one of the things about, you talk about morale and long seasons. One of the things we do is we bring in folks for the last 2 sessions. These are folks that have been with camp for a long time, but they come in to do like a 2-week stint at camp, and we bring them in towards the end. And it's amazing what a shot of energy coming from that type of person can do. And her name's Connie Crittenden, and she's great. And she's helping with this internship program for education majors.
Well, what would they call that in baseball when they bring in the guys at the end to like?
Yeah, I don't, right. A pitch hitter, maybe?
Right. So you bring in your
Yeah.
pitch hitters for that last inning of your season. So that is great. So Curtis, where can we go online to learn more about Camp Lookout?
Yeah, so projectfoxwood.com is the main overarching one website. And then there's 2 other camp lookouts in the country. We are the one in Michigan, and our URL there is lookoutsummer.com. And then it's campcarvella.com and crystalairadventures.com. And then there's all the social medias and the Facebooks and all that stuff too.
What's the future look like for Project Foxwood, Curtis? What are we going to see coming from you guys in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so in COVID, we ran a residential school for high schoolers called the Carvella School. And we learned a ton with that. And it's something that there's a bunch of folks within our organization that are really passionate about residential school type programs. And so that's one avenue that we want to explore. And then, yeah, our trips program, like I said, we're really kind of growing into these bigger, more expedition type trips, Alaska.
Like a team tour, your trip program kind of be what we on the East Coast would call like a team tour kind of thing.
Yeah, so we have that component of it, and that's one of the areas we're sort of trying to grow. And then we have littler trips and things in the Midwest here that, we'll do trips for 8-year-olds, which is great. So yeah, and so that's a little bit different, but yeah.
Wow. Well, Curtis, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today in the HC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about Camp Lookout, Camp Carvella, Crystal Air Adventures, your story. Like, it's really amazing.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
Thank you guys. So thank you guys for joining me today on the My Camp podcast. If you want to hear more about My Camp, you can find us where you listen to podcasts. We're on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So join us again. We'll see you back here at My Camp, and I'll save us more for you.
Take a moment to shine on Happy Camper